Well, g'day everybody, and welcome to this discussion about the Australian wars. I'm here with Alex from Culture is Life. We'll get to you in just a minute, Alex. I want to
No worries.
acknowledge that I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Jara country. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung, and I want to acknowledge country. I want to acknowledge country as a starting point for all knowledge. I want to acknowledge the elders, past and present in our community, the elders that we live with, um, the elders that we know and who have cared for country and cared for knowledge for many years. I want to acknowledge that education has been happening here on Jara country and right across this country of countries for tens of thousands of years. That's a long time to try and get your head around, but it's also reassuring. It's been happening everywhere on country. So, Alex, I'll let you introduce yourself as we launch into a discussion about the resources around the Australian wars.
Thanks, Scott. I'm joining from Gadi today, Gadigal, the land of Gadigal people here in Sydney, what is now known as Sydney. And in your acknowledgement of country, I'd like to echo that, of course, in terms of where I'm joining from. Although we are virtually in a space, there's also obviously the country that we are physically on, and everyone watching this video is on country somewhere. We all understand that. This place, this country, I think, has given the impacts of colonisation, of invasion since 1770 for 250 plus years, has weathered the impacts of colonisation, has weathered the impacts of that invasion, and of course through a series like the Australian Wars, we see the impact of what that has meant, the truth of what has occurred. So I just want to make a point, I guess, of acknowledging country here, pay respects to the elders of this place, but also really acknowledge the fact that despite these attempts at dispossession, at damage, destruction of culture, removal of people, and at obviously massacre, genocide, these things that are so horrific, despite that, culture has survived, and despite that, Aboriginal people are still practicing culture and are reviving culture in the face of that devastation. So pay particular respects to the elders of this place, Gadigal, of Bidjigal, the country where those boats first arrived, particularly. Yeah, pay that importance. I'm a non-Indigenous person myself. Come from my family on my dad's side are Scottish, on my mum's side Portuguese, and I have spent my life. I'm a teacher by training, and have spent my career working a lot with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, teachers, educators, community members more broadly. Worked with Reconciliation Australia for quite a long time on the Narragansett program, designing that program with a team of Aboriginal educators, and have been working with Shark Island Productions, who are a production company in the Shark Island Foundation, who philanthropically supported the making of the Australian Wars, and also working with Culture is Life, who are an Aboriginal run organisation who developed a lot of the resources that go with the series.
Excellent. Well, I was born on Gadigal country. I lived on Jara country most of my life now, but I was born up on Gadigal country. My mum was
Yeah,
born
yeah.
on Yuin country, and we're Kamilaroi through my mum. So we've got a little bit of connection there. I'm also a teacher by training, and have worked in Indigenous Ed for some time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to our bit of a yarn here today.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
going to
Me
jump,
too.
yeah, I'm going to jump straight into a question about the resource. And I'm sort of coming to you from someone who's really engaged with pre-service teachers. So a lot of my questions are really thinking about pre-service teachers. I've been yarning with them a lot about putting some of these questions together. And so they come from that kind of perspective. So my first question, Alex, is why should pre-service teachers care about teaching the frontier wars?
Such a such a great question. I think
Just a small one to start with, eh?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, just a small one. I think maybe one thing worth mentioning, perhaps in that idea of pre-service teachers, particularly, is not to put undue pressure on you, on saying you meaning pre-service teachers, the potential that the likely viewers of this webinar, of this discussion. I think we are all of Australia is grappling with and trying to, I think, positively move towards truth telling, to understand more about the truth of of this place's history of what is now known as Australia. So don't feel I know your question is about why should we care, but I also want to make sure that non-Indigenous teachers, non-Indigenous pre-service teachers particularly, of which 99% of the cohort of teachers are non-Indigenous people, don't feel the pressure is all on you. You know, like the pressure is on Australia. We are all collectively as society having to engage in this truth. But why should teachers particularly care, and why hopefully do you care? Is because of that same reason. We have the ability to shape the next generation, and the understanding of those generations that are coming of Australian young people, of children, through classrooms. And this is a part of our nation's history that has not been told, is not understood, has never been resolved, and it's just vital that we do that. That truth telling is such an important component. We know it's an important component of what you could broadly term reconciliation, that idea of knowing the truth. So often I've worked with Aboriginal people who've been, sorry, not necessarily that I've worked with, that the idea of Aboriginal people being told that was 250 years ago, can't we move on? You know, let's move on or something. It's not now. I didn't do it. Why should we care? Those sorts of things are obviously quite inflammatory and offensive to a lot of Aboriginal people, fair enough too. But I think when you think about the depth behind that question, if you haven't accepted the truth of what happened, if you don't know what you're moving on from, how can you say, let's move on? So I think it's a really big component, that idea of, let's just move on, which is often a cliche or a comment you hear from people. We can't move on unless we know what we're moving on from. And this series, the idea of the frontier wars, the violence that has occurred on this country, and I'm talking about countries, obviously Aboriginal countries, but on this continent that is known as Australia, then we can't move on. So I think if we want to move on, if we want to have some level of reconciliation, if we want to build relationships and respect between non-Indigenous people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, then of course truth telling is vital. And within that, I think there's no doubt that by default, 99% of teachers literally in Australia are non-Indigenous people. So don't think that as a non-Indigenous teacher, oh, it's not my place, I shouldn't do it. This is it's vital. In fact, that makes me think of one other thing to mention, which is that it's this is not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural knowledges, although of course that's an impact that comes out of this discussion. But this is actually non-Indigenous history. This is the history of what non-Indigenous people have done in this country. That is absolutely the place for a non-Indigenous teacher to teach about. This is not a Aboriginal cultural process. This is not talking about men's business, women's business. It's not talking about art. It's not talking about language, which would require and should be, fair enough, absolutely led by Aboriginal people. This is non-Indigenous truth. This is the atrocities occurred at the hands of non-Indigenous people. So again, just to build that strength, it's not about guilt, but the truth, of course, is at the hands of non-Indigenous people to talk about. So as pre-service teachers, hopefully that gives you confidence and enthusiasm to engage in this rather than fear or trepidation to step back.
I think there's something in that sits at the heart of the Australian curriculum, cross-curriculum priorities too, that it is everybody's responsibility, that it is a shared history,
Yeah.
and that it isn't about guilt. And I think that's really important to remember. So thanks for reminding everybody about that. Because we know that, and this leads into my next question, we know that many non-Indigenous teachers feel quite hesitant about
Mm.
that. There's some really interesting research that says actually only about 10% or so of teachers in the workforce currently feel quite confident in jumping into teaching towards Indigenous content. Clearly, as you've outlined, it's more about kind of shared history than it is cultural knowledge. But still, even
Mm.
so, only about 10% of people feel confident. So there's a bit of work to be done there. And so we know that lots of teachers feel quite hesitant. They're quite worried about doing things right, that perhaps it's not their place. I just wonder if you might expand a little bit on a response to that for those teachers that do feel hesitant, specifically about thinking about the Australian laws.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally understandable, and I think there would be empathy really from anyone. Aboriginal, non-Indigenous people would have empathy to a teacher's. It is connected, like you said, to that first question, in that idea of the pressure perhaps that's felt by the teaching population, the teaching community in Australia, the pressure to solve all of society's problems. Yeah, it's always teachers always had that pressure lumped on them. So I totally get that anxiety, the hesitancy, and particularly when it's something that none of us, no Australians, I mean, with an exception, there might be a few, but generally, no Australians have ever learnt this history, have never taught, it's never been taught in schools before. So no, therefore, no Australian teacher, I'm saying none, there's obviously going to be a few, but not many Australian teachers currently, or pre-service teachers. Hopefully that's going to change with these sorts of resources, but not many teachers um, would ever have learnt this themselves. So the idea of teaching something that you don't know is even more anxiety ridden. You know, like that idea of, oh, how am I going to talk about this? I've never learnt this. I don't know how, you know, what this is. Is this, where's the truth come from, etc. Whose perspective am I talking from? There's a whole lot of reasons why, and we shouldn't hammer on the negatives or the anxiety inducing components, because that should therefore be reassuring to say no one really knows what they're doing. So embrace that, and acknowledge that. And I think probably the power of there's one thing that I think happens a lot with hesitancy, and that idea of, it's again a comment I've heard many times, which is that fear of getting it wrong, and that fear of getting something wrong then results in doing nothing, and doing nothing is so much worse than doing something and getting it wrong. You may well get it. In fact, I would say you will probably get it wrong. You will probably at some point, maybe not with these resources and the scaffolding that we provided, and the content obviously is very powerful and incredibly well researched and resourced, which is probably hopefully reassuring to you all, and to teachers out there right now. But the likelihood of someone in your local community, an Aboriginal parent, a family member, there may be connections to people who take exception to the way something's discussed, or they wanted to be involved and you didn't involve them, and you didn't realize that they were involved in something that connects to the teaching you've done. I'm saying this with, I hope, with strength for everybody. You will probably get it wrong, and that is an opportunity to learn, and that opportunity to get it wrong, and then accept that it didn't work quite the right way, or you made an error, or even you didn't make an error, it just didn't work, as in someone had a reason to be concerned. Then you can move on from that with a stronger relationship, and that strength of relationship is really important. So I think that idea of not being fearful of getting it wrong, but just sort of getting ready for that happening, and going for it with confidence, is really important. And then doing everything you can, I guess, to also to mitigate getting it wrong, which is using quality resources. We've talked about the idea of the content I just mentioned before. The content is incredibly well researched. It involves Aboriginal voices throughout. It's been made by an Aboriginal production company. Its filmmaker, its host, is an Aboriginal person. That obviously, in Rachel Perkins, an incredible person, obviously, filmmaker, influential. I don't know how many words I could use to describe how important Rachel Perkins is, but she
Yeah,
is at the heart of it.
impressive.
That's it. And then the extensive, or people featuring throughout the series obviously is very important. That that's a really important thing to remember. That should give you confidence. And within that, the confidence then of the resources. These resources have been produced and written by a team of Aboriginal people. Those Aboriginal people are coming with that lived experience. The resource has been written in that way, in partnership with and the oversight of, again, Rachel Perkins herself and the team at the production company, Blackfella Films. Within that, and that sort of process, I guess, should provide some confidence. And then within that, your own ability to have a voice in the classroom. You're not relying on you speaking for, which you should never do, speaking for an Aboriginal person. You get to press, and I don't mean to, I hate the idea of the virtual world we live in, but really you get to press play on some content in your classroom, share it with your students, where it's relevant and where it's right and safe to do it. And you've got Aboriginal voices in your classroom who are absolutely legitimate voices to be listening to and talking about. They don't replace local knowledges, local understanding, and local community, but absolutely the importance of that, and the strength of that should provide, I hope, confidence to you. I don't know if I meandered too far on that, Scott, but
Yeah, no, look, I think one of the things I tell my students is exactly that they really have the responsibility that previous teachers haven't had, but it's also an opportunity. And
yeah,
certainly from the students that I work with, they really are kind of interested in doing this work. They need some assistance and some building up for sure. But just like you might need to learn a new bit of maths or a new piece of literature or a book that you might learn, there's opportunities to learn what you need to learn in order to do this well.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I always tell my students, if you come into this with an open heart and an open mind, you're going to avoid catastrophic mistakes. But on top of that, there's also now some really good resources for supporting teachers in this work. And so I'm thinking of the IATSIS guide for resource selection. You've
yeah,
mentioned previously the Ngunnawal Wally that you've worked on, but also, of course, the resources surrounding the Australian Wars are just a top rate. So while there is a greater level of responsibility, there's also never been so much support to get this right. So, I'm with you. Let's
yeah.
let's let's build the momentum. Let's keep this going.
And you
Um,
know what, Scott, I was just thinking because I feel, reflecting, hearing you just then and giving a chance to reflect on my, blah blah I just gave, the bit of that probably it could end up feeling and sounding. I hope it didn't sound like it was a fear-inducing or a negative kind of response, because actually the overwhelming response from this series and from the teachers using the resources has been one of incredible positivity. There's been great, we've got great feedback from teachers in classrooms saying this was just incredible. It was a moment for us all to come together. Students were begging to watch more. They went back and spoke to their families about the series. That prompted their family to then watch the series. There's overwhelmingly positive feedback. We have had none of the feedback I gave before around getting it wrong at all. It was just that sort of overarching idea I guess I was thinking to respond to. But really, the so far there's only been successful, healthy conversations coming out of this series and its resources.
yeah, it's been really similar with my experiences. I mean,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
the it's the it's the I mean, it's a credit to Rachel and the storytellers for producing such an amazing story, well,
Yeah.
and doing such amazing storytelling. Really, is what I mean. And so, that just brings people together, as you said, and that's certainly been my experience. Um, there's a whole, and I think it's okay to start with acknowledging that hesitancy because that is real for a lot of teachers, but it's
Mm,
also fantastic to be able to reassure them of the resources and the supports that are out there. Plus, that they're joining kind of a range of teachers who have already had success with this. So it sort of sharpens up my thinking towards another question for you, Alex, about the practical steps and what those should be for pre-service teachers. What practical steps can they take now to prepare themselves for teaching the Australian wars?
I think one thing that's really important, and I know I mentioned earlier the idea that teachers often feel extra anxious about something if they don't know the content themselves, about teaching something that they're not aware of themselves, or that we, as a teacher, that we or I am not aware of. If I'm going to teach a maths concept to a year 4 classroom, I come from a primary school teaching background, and I myself don't actually understand exactly how that works, which I can tell you is true as a teacher that strongly from the humanities side. Um, I I mean, how am I possibly going to do justice to that in that classroom? So you need to do the work yourself first. It's totally possible. And it doesn't require going and doing a degree in Indigenous studies or spending weeks and weeks sitting unpacking every level of primary source material within the Australian wars to confirm it's, you deeply understand it. There's a level of understanding that comes just from watching the series in this case. So I think there's no doubt you should watch the series yourself. Prepare yourself first by watching, watch the whole series. The three episodes absolutely would be a good place to start. Whether you show a little bit, maybe even none of it in your classroom, depending on the appropriateness and what you believe is right, is obviously up to you. So don't feel that you then have to, the idea is press play on the whole series and show it to students. That's not absolutely essential. But I think for you as a teacher, as an adult Australian, you should definitely watch the series yourself. Feel an element of confidence in what the series is going to do and what the documentary itself, the tone, the level, the method of it, the method of the creation of the series itself. And so that's one thing. Equip yourself, self-learning, understanding. The probably again, it's a big thing, but it really is important to reflect on your own bias, to try if you can, and it doesn't have to involve other people, criticizing you. You can do it yourself. Sit there and just think about what you're bringing to this situation. Who are you as a, like I said, I'm speaking to a mostly non-Indigenous audience in this discussion of the teaching cohort in Australia. That idea of knowing the bias that you carry, knowing your own background, knowing your understanding, and be aware of that bias is a really important thing. So that's really important. Um, you could connect if you can. If you do all that, I think that's like bare minimum, absolutely. Even better would be to be able to engage and do a bit more preparation. Let's say, a term ahead or a couple of terms ahead or something. I don't know how much time it might take to do this, but depending on the level of relationship that you have in your school or that you have as a pre-service teacher with a local community, would be to work out a way to potentially do this in partnership with Aboriginal people. So if you have the ability to work with your local community, absolutely do that. And don't just assume you can't. Think about maybe this is a thing to come together on and to engage in. It's obviously traumatic content. It is not simple. It's not easy. So don't take it as like, call your local lands council and expect that next Tuesday someone's going to come along and watch the series with you. I mean, it's just very unlikely. And that's all on your terms. I guess there's a concept again, remembering that this is not a I need an Aboriginal person next week for my classroom. That sort of concept is just not healthy. What you need is to build a relationship with your local community, which will then result, I'm sure, not next week on Tuesday, but let's say 6 months down the track, if you've built that relationship with integrity and with strength at its heart, you're very likely to then have that community member saying to you, hey, Alex, do you want to come and work on this thing with us? Or could we come and talk about this at your school? And you won't even need to then be asking for this sort of stuff because the likelihood is that it will happen because of the strength of the relationship. So definitely connect to your local community if you can, and have that as a priority, always sitting there of something to do, and that is important. And within that would then be, the local understanding of perhaps how frontier violence, the frontier wars may have played out in your community. But also contemporary examples of the continuous and continuing lack of acknowledgement of truth is really important, and that will come from the voices of Aboriginal people. I think I think, as I said earlier in the introduction, the non-Indigenous perspective of this history and this truth telling is also important from a local perspective. So you may be able to contact literally your local council. You may be able to contact and or do a little bit of some sort of research through local historical societies, and actually find out about something that has happened in your local area. And if you could do that, would just be incredible. Like I'm probably going beyond the like base level and thinking, you know what, like imagine if you could actually find out about something that happened in your area and begin a process of truth telling of that. Like I said before, these are non-Indigenous histories. There's colonial accounts of what happened, written by non-Indigenous people, recorded by non-Indigenous people, sitting in non-Indigenous, libraries, archives. This is not secret Aboriginal content or knowledge that you need to be aware of. This was written by non-Indigenous people. So maybe
Mhm.
engage in that. And of course, if you have Aboriginal people, Aboriginal young people, students in your classrooms and or families in your communities, then engage with them with some preparation. So don't just watch the series tonight and tomorrow teach it in your classroom. Prepare your particularly Aboriginal students and families for this content. This is not easy content in any way. So when I say it's the base model, it's a big base model to start with. It's not easy content, and it may be something that requires, or it definitely requires your sensitivity to your local families and community, but more importantly, the ability for that community or that family or that student to say, I actually don't want to be in the room when you watch this, or I do want to be there, or I want to come at the end, or can we talk about how you're going to do it? Definitely don't single out or talk to Aboriginal people specifically without some sort of preparation and context for this.
Alex, you mentioned that teachers should definitely watch all three parts of the series. Um, I'm aware of the rating of the Australian Wars as a documentary. So have you got any tips on students watching it in particular?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Teachers for sure should watch it, and students should watch it too. There's obviously that, like you said, the rating of the series itself is important to keep in mind. For senior secondary, absolutely should watch the series. Secondary, maybe year eight. It's got a rating of M, so you need to engage with your own school's policy on how you engage with that sort of content. But certainly, the idea of that students watching it. And we've also made, so that's the whole series, and absolutely that would be the best case scenario. The series itself also is in smaller clips available that are appropriate for many different ages, and they don't have the same rating. And so within that, there's no reason why any student can't engage in that content. As we said, and as we talk about so often, as teachers, make sure you've looked at it yourself first. So don't just click on the clip and then realize you should never have shown that in that situation. Watch it first yourself. The clip, even if it's a short clip, watch it. Then engage with all students. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The resources are actually the clips are actually quite small when you dive into those the younger years,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
so they're really well supported. If you do the work initially in preparation, you'll find material that you can work with.
Yeah, yeah, agree.
Right. As you say, it's not easy work, but it's really it's such a significant story that it's an opportunity for a whole range of things, for making connections, for um, connecting with local community, for examining your own practice. And I kind of want to come back to that a little bit in order to move forward. You mentioned the idea of being aware of your own biases. And so encourage my students and a lot of the teachers I work with to think about themselves, think about their biases as a kind of a positionality. What's their position?
Mm,
Um, where are they coming from? How is it that their upbringing, their set of beliefs are impacting what it is they're thinking, what sort of resources they're choosing to include, what sort of resources they're choosing not to include. And I think that's really important work. And so I think you've outlined really nicely the kind of self-work that happens for teachers in getting ready for this, and that it isn't quick and it often isn't easy. There's some time that teachers might need to spend with being a little uncomfortable. And so I want to acknowledge that. But again, it's not about being guilty. It's not about kind of being accused of being biased in the sense that you're being prejudiced. It's saying bias in the sense that you will carry attitudes and ideas with you that will influence the way you think about things in the classroom, the way you think about students, the way you select resources, as we've mentioned. So just giving yourself a little bit of time to do that, it's a really nice reminder. I think one thing that thinking about those insights that I think is really important is that the people you're delivering this content to, so asking students to engage in the Australian wars, will often bring up similar kind of responses of perhaps resistance or hesitancy, sometimes even hostility from the students and possibly even from their families. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that while there needs to be some time spent on yourself as a non-Indigenous teacher, what about then thinking through some of the scenarios of student responses or parent responses? I've worked in schools where even there's kind of responses from my colleagues, from fellow teachers who have a really strong response to this. So, can you just share a few ideas about the importance of thinking through that before starting off?
yeah, I think just literally thinking about it is a step that probably isn't done enough,
Mm.
and that on its own is probably the answer is yes, you should think about it. I think similarly to the tone of a few of my responses and of this discussion so far, not trying to dwell on negatives or the things that may occur or that could occur in a deficit style way of thinking in terms of your approach to this as a teacher, but it's important to mitigate, I guess. And so this is an opportunity to another example of mitigating that risk. So absolutely a simulation, for yourself going through, okay, what could this possibly do? Your own reflections may well help you understand that. I would suggest talking if you can do it, and if you've got a like-minded, hopefully engaged teaching cohort at your school, perhaps a few of you do it together, sit down and unpack some of the content you're intending on teaching and see if anyone has any reflections on, you got to, the Smith family have been, actively uh, tearing down anything we do around any sort of understanding of local knowledge of history or something. So be aware of that. I'm talking about, a non-Indigenous perspective, for example. There might be a particular red flag that's raised by a teacher, a colleague that you didn't know about. So absolutely, I think talking to each other, talking to other teachers is really important. And the potential of that. I guess actually, you know what? I just want to pause for 1 second. That also, um, you don't need. I mean, do what's safe for you as a teacher and do what's professional for you as a teacher. But at the same time, don't let that idea of talking to other teachers and then everyone saying, no, you shouldn't do that. Don't do that. Don't let that also put you off. So have the confidence to be like, well, I know this is right. It's part of the curriculum. There's a great resource here. It's solid. It's as safe as it could be for a national level engagement and discussion around this. So go for it, like go for it. So I don't want you to think that that gives you a lack of confidence. Sometimes the discussion with others may well put you off. So hopefully that doesn't happen. And then out of that sort of, I guess, understanding it, yeah, some of the questions, the content you might go through, you could talk to your own families and friends about it, as well. Practice some of those ideas. I think is a really important component.
I
And
think debriefing for teachers is
yeah, yeah,
is is desperately important. I think chatting with people who you know who will be kind of on board with being open to the discussion. You'll
yeah,
find them in schools. I often tell my students that you're not stepping out into a utopia. There will be hostility out there, but there will also be people who are willing to do this kind of work, or who might just be looking for someone to get things started, or
yeah,
yeah, someone to walk hand in hand with on this material. So
yeah,
I think one of the things to remember for students who are about to hit the classroom as teachers is that they really are kind of leaders in this new knowledge economy. And part of that, for us as Australians living in a colonized society, is the moral leadership needed to look back at history with truth. And I think that can happen at a national level, but let's not wait for it. It can happen at a kind of a regional or state level. Let's not wait for it. It can happen in classrooms, and we can be in charge of that as teachers. And I think that's really important because it amplifies the importance of your choices as a teacher, that you can actually have a really large impact just from that position. And I just don't want anyone to underestimate the importance of that. This is a really important part of change in this country, Alex. What do you
yeah.
reckon?
I think we're at a point where there's a lot more. I mean, this conversation wouldn't have been happening maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, unlikely, 15 or 20 years ago, pretty much forget about it. There's always been, obviously, for 250 years, there's been attempts to tell the truth and to raise the profile of truth telling. And there have been teachers doing great things, I'm sure, since the establishment of what is our, education system, I guess, in Australia, since invasion and colonization. But really, right now, I feel like there is a lot more willingness. The curriculum itself, as you've already said, has got content directing teachers to teach content. The understanding of surely people understand that we need to know the truth of our own history. We have to do that. We can't hide. We can't hide from that. So yeah, change is really. I think it's happening. I really do. And I think the courage of a younger, a less experienced teacher, to bring that change is something that could probably to be excited by. Like it's not necessarily try not to think of it as a daunting, overwhelming challenge, but think of it as being you're coming into a community of teachers, who want your energy, they want your enthusiasm, they want your guidance. And often I find the less experienced teachers, or the teach as in less experienced classroom teachers, are bringing a much more direct experience of what it is to be a young person and or a community member in Australia. So bring that is a really important thing as a teacher. So I think see that as a positive, see that as a courageous thing, and a change. You hear that cliche about a change maker, but really the generation that we are now, pre-service teachers coming into the profession, are absolutely going to be at the forefront of changing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm really encouraged by that. Another thing that I'm really encouraged by is the capacity of young Australians. So students, really young
Yeah, of
students, who are
course. Yeah.
still primary school students, who are still high school students, who are looking around for this kind of leadership from their teachers, but also have great capacity to take those kinds of leadership positions themselves, to be kind of change agents to make that work. And I think that really fills me with hope. And so in this kind of unique moment, to round off our discussion, Alex, have you got any particular kind of key tips for these our students who are soon to be teachers?
Um, I mean, we've covered so much, haven't we, today in this relatively short conversation. But I think the idea of this being not waiting, don't wait for someone else to do it, or don't wait till you feel really confident and really ready. You know, despite me saying be as confident as ready as you can be. I think don't hold off. Don't do that at the expense of nothing. Like I said before, people at the expense of doing something and getting it wrong is much better than doing nothing. And we need to do something. So I think the one takeaway is here's a, like we've said many times, you know, a reputable quality suite of resources. You can tap in small chunks, you can do huge units of work, you could do a small lesson here, you could engage during a week of significance throughout the year, reconciliation week, NAIDOC week, that sort of style of teaching. Of course, that's good, but you could do that, or you could do, you know, like I said, a term long unit of work. You could extend that beyond that. So I guess there's no excuse, and I say that with respect and with warmth. There's no excuse now to do nothing. There is so much content out there. This is an example of that. There is so much content for teachers to teach. So yeah, so don't wait for someone else to do it. You can do it. These resources could be a really great starting point for you. It's not done when you know, oh, I did what Scott and Alex were talking about, so now I'm done. You know, we've got this under control. That's obviously also a pretty
Yeah.
short-sighted view. So don't think of this as being the end. This is the beginning, perhaps, for you. And if it's not the beginning for you, if you're already engaged and have been teaching or are really interested and feel capable, then see this as a strengthening moment for that. You know, a midpoint. I don't know how you want to think about it, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think that's important. That just kind of comes back to a couple of things you've said throughout this discussion, that isn't an end point. It's a starting point for more meaningful relationships, for deeper conversations, for, I mean, at a technical level, addressing some of the cross-curriculum priorities, but a
yeah,
moral level, thinking about what truth is within this country. And in particular, I think, to pick up on the very last part of our conversation, there's this idea of this being sort of teaching history, but ultimately what we're doing is preparing for a more honest and meaningful and fruitful future for this country. And I think that is actually really emboldening. That is something that
yeah.
you can think carefully about, you know, hinging a whole career in the classroom off a promise like that, or off the potential of an idea like that. I think that's really important. That's really
I think
important.
you're right, Scott. I mean, I can't think of anyone, I cannot think of many, maybe any teacher that wouldn't be teaching because they believe in the next generation, because they want the future to be better, you know, and I think that surely, if that is the reason that most of us are teaching, which I think is probably true, then here's a great way to do that, you know, like in a powerful way and a significant way.
Thanks so much for this discussion, Alex. I've really enjoyed our discussion. I really have. It's lovely to spend some time together again.
Yeah, me too.
If you're a student out there watching this, please be sure to make sure you jump in and watch all 3 episodes. You can find the teaching resources in a few different places through Culture is Life, Ngunnawal Wally and Nanga. SBS as well, Alex, I think. Is that right? Is that still SBS is
Yeah,
still hosting the resources?
yeah, that's right. SBS Learn hosts the resources. The full series you can watch on SBS On Demand. You can also watch it in classrooms on ClickView or through ClickView if your school has access to that. And if you can't access it for whatever reason, or you're finding it hard to understand how to get to it, always just contact you know, the team. We have a team, Australian Wars uh, education team, I guess, in that sense. So just send an email to either the Australian Wars email address or to Culture is Life's contact, and we'll happily support you. Or obviously speak to you, Scott. You can
Yeah,
help
well, if you're in a
find
university or you're in a
it.
school, of course, chat to the friendly librarian because they love these kinds of conversations.
That's right.
Well, thanks again, Alex. Catch you soon.
No worries. Thank you, Scott.